I'm desperate for a man's warmth, giant Apache girl, said widowed rancher. The sun had just begun to rise over the vast, dusty plains of the southwest, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Samuel adjusted his worn hat and took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The wind carried the faint smell of sagebrush and dry earth, a smell he had grown used to over the years. His ranch stretched over acres of land, with cattle grazing slowly in the distance, and a small wooden barn standing quietly against the horizon. Breath. Every morning Samuel followed the same routine. Feed the animals, check the fences, inspect the fields, and ensure that everything was running smoothly. Life on the ranch was hard work, but it was honest work, and Samuel had spent most of his adult life dedicated to it. Since the sudden passing of his wife, life had become quieter, lonelier. Their love had been steady, a partnership built over decades, and her absence left an emptiness in Samuel's heart that no amount of work could fill. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. He often found himself pausing in the middle of chores, staring out at the horizon, wishing he could hear her voice or see her smile. The memories lingered in every corner of the house, the kitchen where she hummed while cooking, the small study where she wrote letters to friends, the garden where her flowers still bloomed despite the harsh sun. He loved her still, and he always would, but the heaviness of loneliness pressed down on him in ways he had never imagined. Samuel was a man who preferred quiet and solitude. He did not need the company of many people to feel complete, but there were days when the isolation was almost unbearable. He had neighbors nearby, other ranchers who visited occasionally, but their visits were brief, filled with polite conversation and practical concerns about cattle or weather. No one truly understood the depth of the emptiness he carried. He rarely spoke about his feelings, burying them beneath layers of responsibility and the physical demands of running a ranch alone. And yet a part of him longed for connection, for someone to share the quiet moments with, someone who could understand the rhythm of his days and the weight of his memories.
Not far from Samuel's ranch, Naya, a young Apache woman, faced her own struggles.
She was known in her community not just for her remarkable height and strength, but for a quiet determination that seemed to set her apart. Life on her family's land had been one of routine, responsibility, and expectation. From an early age, Naya had been taught the ways of her people, the importance of respect, tradition, and community. But she had also felt the limits these expectations placed on her. While others her age were beginning to explore the world beyond their small town, Naya often felt confined, a life of predictability stretching before her like the endless plains. Naya's family was loving, but their love came with conditions. She was expected to follow certain rules, help with family chores, participate in tribal ceremonies, and behave in ways that reflected well on her family and heritage. While she understood and respected these traditions, she often felt that her own desires were pushed aside. She longed for independence, for the chance to make her own decisions, to explore what life had to offer outside the boundaries she had always known. And most of all, she longed for emotional warmth, for a connection that went beyond the expectations of duty and tradition. Naya had watched friends fall in love, get married, and start families, and she sometimes felt left behind, wondering when or if she would ever experience the same kind of bond. One morning, Naya set out for the nearest town to gather supplies. The journey was long, the road rough, but she welcomed the chance to step beyond her familiar surroundings. She rode her horse steadily, feeling the wind in her hair and the sun on her back. As she approached the town, she noticed the small cluster of buildings that marked its center: a general store, a post office, a few houses, and the occasional rancher's property. Among these buildings, Samuel's ranch stood out, not because it was the largest, but because of its quiet dignity. The wooden fences were well kept, the barns sturdy, and the land around it cared for with precision. Something about the ranch caught Naya's attention, though she could not explain why. Samuel, meanwhile, was already busy in the barn inspecting the cattle and making notes in his worn leather journal. He had been at it for hours, moving between pens, adjusting gates, and checking water troughs. He looked up briefly when he heard the faint sound of hooves approaching. At first he thought it might be one of his neighbors, but as the figure drew nearer, he noticed a young woman riding confidently on a tall horse. She moved with ease, guiding her horse skillfully across the uneven terrain. There was something about her presence that made him pause. A quiet strength, a sense of purpose, and an openness that was rare in the people he encountered. When Naya arrived at the edge of the property, she dismounted and tied her horse to a post. She looked around, taking in the layout of the ranch, the cattle grazing peacefully, and the barn where Samuel stood observing her. She felt a mix of curiosity and nervousness. She had not expected to see anyone working so early in the morning, and she was aware of the hesitation in her own heart. Samuel approached cautiously, his eyes studying her, trying to understand who she was and why she had come. "Good morning," Samuel said finally, his voice steady but gentle. "Can I help you with something?" Naya smiled, a small, tentative gesture. I'm here to buy some supplies," she replied, her voice calm, but carrying a hint of nervousness. "Or maybe trade a few things. My family sent me." Samuel nodded, his mind observing her carefully. There was nothing unusual about a young woman coming to town, but there was something in her expression, a quiet determination mixed with vulnerability, that made him take notice. He gestured toward the barn. "I have some goods. You can take a look if you like." As Naya stepped inside, she felt a sense of curiosity and anticipation. The barn was simple but organized, filled with tools, supplies, and the smell of hay and leather. Samuel moved with ease, showing her items she might need and answering questions about prices and availability. Their conversation was polite at first, but as the minutes passed, it began to take on a more personal tone. They spoke of the land, the weather, and the challenges of living in such a remote area. Samuel shared stories of past seasons, of storms that had swept through the plains, of cattle lost and found, and of the routines that kept the ranch running smoothly. Naya listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but more often observing the quiet strength in the man before her. She noticed how careful he was with the animals, how patient he was in explaining things, and how there was a calmness about him that seemed to fill the space around him. For Samuel, it was different. He had spent years interacting with people who were focused on business or gossip, but Naya seemed genuinely interested in understanding the land and the work it required. There was no judgment in her eyes, no expectation, only curiosity and honesty. He found himself speaking more freely than he had with anyone in a long time. Browned and desperate. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of connection, a sense that perhaps he was not as alone as he had believed. As the morning passed, they found themselves laughing over small, simple things. An animal that had gotten loose, a miscommunication over supplies, a shared memory of something unexpected. The sound of their laughter echoed softly across the barn, mingling with the faint noises of the ranch and the wind outside. Breaths. In that moment, both Samuel and Naya felt something unspoken pass between them, a recognition of shared loneliness, a subtle understanding that each had been searching for something that the other might provide. By the time Naya prepared to leave, she felt a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. She had accomplished what she came for, yet she found herself reluctant to go. Breaths. Samuel, too, felt a tug in his heart, a desire to know more about the young woman who had stepped onto his property and into his life so unexpectedly. Hope we see each other again, Naya said softly, mounting her horse. There was a quiet vulnerability in her voice that Samuel did not miss. "I hope so," Samuel replied, tipping his hat. "Take care on the road back." As she rode away, the wind carrying her hair like a banner behind her, Samuel watched her go, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension.
For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a future where loneliness might not be the only companion.
Naya, too, thought of the quiet rancher, his steady voice, and the gentle kindness she had glimpsed, wondering if her journey might be more than just a trip for supplies. The plains stretched endlessly before them both, but somehow it felt as if a new path had opened, one that might lead to understanding, trust, and the warmth each of them had been quietly seeking. And though neither could see it yet, the meeting on that dusty morning was the beginning of a connection that would change both their lives forever. The days after their first meeting passed with a quiet rhythm, each of them occupied with their own responsibilities but carrying the memory of that morning in their minds. Samuel returned to his routine with a sense of subtle anticipation. Round. Tasks that had once felt monotonous now had an added weight of expectation, as if the land itself had become a place where something new could grow. He found himself glancing at the horizon more often, wondering if Naya would return to his ranch, hoping for another encounter, even though he tried not to admit it aloud. Meanwhile, Naya's thoughts were just as preoccupied. Her journey back to her family's land was filled with reflections on the tall, quiet man she had met. She had seen many faces in her life, family, neighbors, traders. But Samuel was different. But there was a steadiness to him, a calm strength that felt safe yet inviting. More than that, there was a kindness in the way he spoke, a sense that he genuinely cared about the land, the animals, and the people around him. For the first time, she felt an unexpected connection, a feeling that someone might understand her desire for warmth and companionship.
A week later, Naya returned to town, this time with a more practical purpose.
First, she needed tools and supplies for her family's household, but she also wanted to visit the ranch once again, drawn by curiosity and a subtle hope. Samuel noticed her approaching from a distance, her tall figure visible even before she reached the gate. He adjusted his hat and straightened his posture, feeling a familiar flutter of anticipation. The barn, which had always been a place of work and solitude, now seemed alive with possibility. "Good morning again," Samuel greeted her as she tied her horse. His voice was steady, but there was a softness underneath, an acknowledgement that their brief encounter had left a mark on both of them.
Good morning,
Naya replied, a small smile on her face. She carried a basket filled with items she had purchased, but there was more in her expression, a quiet eagerness to speak, to share, to learn. As they moved into the barn, the conversation began cautiously. Samuel showed her the new tools he had acquired and explained how they were used for ranch work. Naya listened intently, asking questions and sometimes offering her own observations. She had a natural curiosity about the land, and she noticed details that Samuel sometimes overlooked. The way a fence leaned slightly, the pattern of the soil, the behavior of the cattle. Her eyes missed nothing. Samuel, in turn, found himself impressed by her attention to detail and the thoughtful way she engaged with the work. They shared small stories about their daily lives. Brave, with quiet reverence describing her laughter, her hands gentle yet skilled in every task, her love for the land and the animals. Naya listened with respect, sensing the depth of his loss. She could see the loneliness he carried, the way it lingered in the spaces between his words, and she understood in her own way, for she too had experienced the weight of longing and solitude. In return, Naya told Samuel about her life in her family's community, about the responsibilities she carried and the expectations placed upon her. Perspective. She spoke of the long days filled with work, the traditions that shaped her, and the small moments of freedom she cherished when she could escape into the open land. Her voice was calm, yet it carried an undercurrent of longing, a subtle plea for understanding, for connection, for someone to see her as more than her duties and her appearance.
Samuel noticed this quietly.
He had spent years with people who only asked for tasks to be done, for business or practicality. But Naya seemed different. She spoke with honesty, without pretense, and he found himself drawn to her openness. He realized that she, like him, had experienced loneliness, had faced expectations that sometimes felt heavy, and had longed for companionship that went beyond casual conversation. There was a rare quality in her presence, a warmth that did not demand anything but simply existed, inviting trust and connection. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes Naya stopped by under the pretext of trading goods or asking advice about tools, but these visits gradually shifted into moments of genuine companionship. They worked together on small projects, repairing a fence, moving hay, mending a gate. And during these tasks, their conversations grew deeper. Samuel found himself sharing stories from his childhood, tales of growing up on the plains, lessons learned from his parents, and experiences that shaped him into the man he had become. Naya in turn spoke of the history of her people, the importance of traditions, and her personal dreams and hopes. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the plains with a warm glow, a sudden storm approached. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Samuel and Naya were caught outside while tending to the animals, and they quickly ran to the barn for shelter. Inside, the space felt smaller. The world outside transformed into a blur of wind and rain. The barn, usually a place of work, became a haven, a temporary world where the two could exist without interruption or expectation. As the storm raged outside, they found themselves sitting near the hayloft, the silence broken only by the sound of rain striking the roof. Naya spoke softly, revealing a piece of herself she had rarely shared with anyone. She talked about her desire for warmth, for understanding, for someone who could see her beyond her responsibilities and her strength. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "I feel like I've been waiting for a connection that might never come. I want to feel safe, understood, and not just for a day or a moment, but in a way that lasts." Samuel listened, moved by the honesty in her voice. Despise. He felt a mix of emotions, empathy, protectiveness, and an unexpected tenderness he had not felt in years. Her words reminded him of his own solitude, the quiet nights spent longing for the presence of another person, someone to share the small joys and the heavy burdens of life. He realized that the connection forming between them was rare and fragile, something that required care, respect, and patience. The storm passed slowly, leaving the land refreshed, the air filled with the clean scent of rain on soil. Breath. Samuel and Naya emerged from the barn, stepping onto the wet ground, their boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. There was a moment of quiet reflection as they surveyed the plains together. Right. Samuel noticed the way Naya's eyes brightened, her presence somehow blending with the land, yet distinct, a force both strong and gentle. He felt a growing admiration for her resilience, her curiosity, and the quiet way she had entered his life. In the following days, their bond strengthened further. They began sharing meals, sitting together on the porch as the sun set, watching the cattle and talking about everything and nothing. These moments were simple, yet profound. An exchange of ideas, laughter, and stories that created a foundation of trust. Samuel felt a lightness he had not known since his wife passed, a sense that life might offer more than routines and obligations. Naya, too, found comfort in his presence, someone who could listen without judgment, someone who understood the balance between strength and vulnerability. Even as their connection grew, both were aware of the subtle boundaries that existed. Breaths. Samuel carried the memory of his late wife with him, a presence that was honored and respected. He did not wish to replace her, nor did he seek to diminish the love he had once shared. Naya, on the other hand, navigated the expectations of her family and her community, careful to respect the traditions that shaped her life. Yet, both sensed that their companionship was natural, a meeting of kindred spirits who had long sought understanding, warmth, and the quiet reassurance of another person's presence. One evening, as the sky glowed with the soft colors of dusk, Naya lingered on the porch, watching Samuel work on a gate. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, a simple gesture that spoke volumes, but they did not need to speak. The comfort of shared silence was enough. There was an unspoken understanding between them, an acknowledgement that their lives, while separate in many ways, had intersected in a meaningful, transformative way. It was in these small, ordinary moments that their connection deepened, not through grand declarations or dramatic events, but through the steady rhythm of everyday life. They began to recognize that companionship was not about rushing into love or ignoring the past, but about being present, sharing experiences, and offering support. Samuel's loneliness began to lift, replaced by a gentle warmth he had almost forgotten, while Naya's longing for understanding and connection found a quiet home in his presence. By the time Naya left that evening, the sun fully set and stars began to appear in the clear night sky. Both of them carried with them a sense of anticipation. Their encounters had evolved from chance meetings into meaningful moments of shared humanity. Each was aware that their bond was growing, delicate yet promising, a quiet force that might guide the next chapters of their lives. Neither spoke of what the future held, but both felt it in the unspoken words, the subtle glances, and the gentle gestures that had become a part of their routine. Life on the plains continued, with all its challenges and beauty, but something new had entered, an understanding, a hope, a possibility that neither had anticipated, but both quietly welcomed. And so the rhythm of their days continued, intertwined not just by work or coincidence, but by the slow, steady growth of trust, curiosity, and the beginnings of a deep human connection that promised to change their lives in ways they had not yet imagined. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Samuel and Naya grew stronger. Their meetings, once casual and brief, became more frequent and meaningful. Every morning Samuel would rise before sunrise to tend to his ranch, yet he now found himself glancing toward the horizon, wondering if Naya would arrive that day. The anticipation was not just curiosity. It was a feeling that had slowly crept into his heart, a warmth he had not felt in years. It surprised him, this subtle excitement at the thought of her presence. But Naya, too, found herself thinking of Samuel more often than she expected. She would recall the way his hands moved confidently as he worked on the fences, the careful attention he gave to the animals, and the quiet way he listened when she spoke. There was a steadiness in him, a sense of reliability that made her feel safe. Yet his presence also encouraged her to explore her own thoughts and feelings more freely. She realized she looked forward to their conversations, not just for the work or the lessons, but for the sense of being understood and appreciated, as she truly was. One bright morning, Naya arrived at the ranch earlier than usual, riding her horse with practiced ease across the plains. Samuel noticed her silhouette against the rising sun, her tall frame moving with confidence and grace. As she approached, she waved, and Samuel returned the gesture, smiling at her familiar presence. Today they had planned to repair a section of fencing that had been weakened by recent rains. It was ordinary work, but as they moved together through the tasks, something extraordinary began to develop, the quiet rhythm of partnership. They worked, side by side, lifting posts, hammering nails, and tightening wires. Samuel showed Naya how to use a post driver efficiently, explaining each movement with patience. Naya listened carefully, absorbing not only the instructions but the subtle ways in which he handled challenges, sometimes offering suggestions based on her own experiences. And Samuel found himself appreciating her insights. Her observations were thoughtful and precise, revealing a keen mind and a practical intelligence that complemented his own expertise. As they paused for a short rest under the shade of an old oak tree, Naya took a sip of water and looked around the open plains. "You have a lot of land here," she said softly, almost to herself. "It feels endless, like it could hold anything, or anyone." Samuel glanced at her, noting the wistfulness in her voice. He did not respond immediately, choosing instead to watch the wind play across the grass. Breath. Finally, he said, "This land has been my life for a long time. It's hard work, but it's honest work. And it can be lonely. More than most people realize." Naya nodded, understanding more than he expected. "I know what you mean. I've spent a lot of time feeling confined, even when I'm surrounded by people who care. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that make you feel the most alone." Her eyes met his, and in that gaze there was an unspoken recognition, a shared understanding of solitude, of longing, and of the subtle ache that comes from wanting more than routine and expectation. Their afternoons often ended in similar ways. Quiet conversations as they tended to animals, shared meals of simple food, or watching the sunset together from the porch of the small ranch house. Each moment, small as it might have seemed, was an opportunity for them to build trust, to learn about each other, and to explore the delicate beginnings of companionship. Breaths. Samuel noticed how Naya laughed easily at little things, how her curiosity brought freshness to the land he had walked for decades. Naya noticed how Samuel listened, truly listened, without judgment, without interruption, offering a space where she could express herself freely. One evening, a small crisis arose on the ranch. A young calf had wandered from its pen and was trapped near the edge of a shallow ravine. Samuel immediately grabbed a rope, but the terrain was tricky, and the calf was frightened. Naya rushed to his side, her confidence and strength evident as she assessed the situation. Together, they devised a plan to coax the calf safely back to the pen. Samuel admired her bravery and determination. Naya appreciated his calm problem-solving and steady hand. The rescue took time, effort, and careful coordination, and when the calf was finally safe, both felt a sense of shared accomplishment and relief. "That went better than I expected," Samuel said, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at Naya and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun.
"You're good at this."
Breath. Strong. Smart. "I'm glad you were here."
Narration.
Naya smiled, feeling a flush of pride and gratitude. "We make a good team," she replied softly.
Breaths. "I'm glad I was here, too." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the quiet acknowledgement of connection between two people who had found understanding in each other. As their partnership grew, so did their conversations. They began to talk about dreams and fears, about moments of joy and sadness that had shaped their lives. Samuel shared memories of his youth, of the love he had for his late wife, and of the lessons he had learned through hard work and loss. Naya spoke of her childhood, the traditions of her people, and the quiet yearning for freedom and emotional connection that had always lingered in her heart. These conversations deepened their bond, creating a foundation of trust and emotional intimacy that neither had anticipated. One afternoon, while repairing a fence in the late sunlight, Naya paused and leaned on her post driver. "I sometimes wonder if anyone will ever understand me," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I feel strong, capable, but there's a part of me that just wants someone to see me, to really see me." Samuel put down his tools and looked at her, sensing the vulnerability in her voice. He approached slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "I think I understand more than you might think," he said.
I know what it's like to feel strong on the outside while carrying something heavy inside.
You're not alone in that. The honesty of the moment created a bond that went beyond shared work. It was the first real acknowledgement that they were not just companions, but people who could trust each other with their innermost thoughts. Breaths. Over the following weeks, this trust manifested in small but meaningful ways. Samuel began to allow Naya into more of his personal life, inviting her to help with tasks inside the house or to sit with him while he planned the week's work. Naya, in turn, shared more about her culture, teaching him small lessons about her people's traditions, their stories, and the way they respected the land. These exchanges created a bridge between their worlds, a blending of experiences that enriched both of their lives. One rainy afternoon, the storm forced them to take shelter in the barn once again. Unlike the first time, they were more comfortable in each other's presence. Naya spoke about her dreams of independence and the future she imagined for herself. One where she could balance her duties and her desires, her heritage and her personal freedom. Samuel listened carefully, offering encouragement and insights without judgment. The storm outside seemed to mirror the intensity of the moment, but inside the barn there was a quiet peace, a shared understanding that went beyond words. By the time the storm passed, both felt a stronger connection. They had learned to rely on each other, not just for physical tasks, but for emotional support. Samuel realized that his heart, once closed and heavy with grief, was beginning to open. Naya recognized that her longing for warmth and understanding had found a place where it could be nurtured safely. In the evenings, they often walked along the edge of the property, watching the sun set behind distant hills. They spoke of hopes and plans, of what might come next in their lives. Neither rushed the conversation. They knew that the bond they were building was fragile yet resilient, capable of growing stronger with patience and care. These walks became a ritual, a time to reflect, share, and simply exist in each other's company. By the end of Part 3, Samuel and Naya had transformed from acquaintances into trusted companions. Their connection was deepening, built on shared work, mutual respect, and growing emotional intimacy. They had faced challenges together, navigated moments of vulnerability, and discovered in each other a sense of understanding and warmth that had long been missing from both of their lives. Though the future remained uncertain, both could feel that something meaningful was developing, something that had the power to change their lives in ways they had not yet imagined. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but with each passing day, the connection between Samuel and Naya had become more visible, not only to themselves but also to others in the town and in Naya's community. While their bond brought warmth and companionship, it also attracted attention, sometimes in ways neither of them expected. One morning, as Samuel worked on repairing a broken fence at the far edge of his land, he noticed a few neighbors passing by on horseback. Their casual glances lingered a little too long, their whispers just audible enough to carry across the field. Samuel felt a twinge of discomfort. The ranch had always been a private space, and he preferred solitude. Now, the quiet curiosity of others seemed to threaten the fragile comfort he had found in his growing friendship with Naya. Meanwhile, Naya, riding into town for supplies, noticed subtle changes in the way people looked at her. Friends from her community gave polite nods, but there was a hint of speculation in their eyes, a quiet questioning that made her cheeks flush. She had always respected her family's traditions and the expectations placed upon her. Yet now she sensed that her visits to Samuel's ranch were being noticed. The realization was uncomfortable. She loved the time she spent with Samuel, the trust they had built, but she also understood that her actions could be misunderstood. Despite these undercurrents, neither Samuel nor Naya allowed it to interfere with their growing companionship. They continued to work together, repair fences, tend animals, and share meals. But there were moments when the weight of public scrutiny crept in, subtle yet persistent, reminding them that their bond existed in a world with rules, expectations, and opinions beyond their control. One afternoon, as they guided a small herd of cattle back to the barn, Naya paused and looked at Samuel with a hint of worry. "Do you ever think about what people might say?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying both concern and vulnerability. Samuel thought for a moment, his hands resting on the wooden fence post. "I try not to," he said slowly. "But yes, I've noticed some people watching, some people whispering.
It's natural, I suppose.
People are curious, and sometimes they judge before they understand. But that doesn't mean we should stop living or stop caring about what matters to us.
Naya nodded, appreciating his honesty. She felt comforted by his words, yet a part of her remained anxious.
She knew that navigating her community's expectations while following her own heart would be difficult. She also understood that Samuel carried his own burdens, the memory of his late wife, the responsibility of the ranch, and the scrutiny of his neighbors. Both of them had to reconcile their desires with the realities around them, and it was not always easy.
As the weeks passed, another challenge arose.
A harsh storm had damaged a section of Samuel's property, leaving a portion of fencing down and a few animals scattered. The physical demands of repairing the damage were significant, but the emotional strain was even greater. Samuel worked tirelessly, yet the exhaustion showed on his face, and Naya, noticing it, insisted on helping him more than usual. Together they labored for hours, lifting posts, stretching wires, and calming frightened animals. During a brief pause as they both sat under the shade of a tree, Naya finally allowed herself to voice a truth she had been holding inside for weeks. Samuel, I'm desperate for a man's warmth, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. I've been strong and I've tried to handle everything on my own, but I need someone to care, to trust, and to be there with me. Not just for a moment, but in a way that lasts. Samuel felt a rush of emotion. Her words, so honest and raw, touched a part of him he had thought long buried. He remembered the quiet nights he had spent alone, the ache of loneliness, and the warmth he had always hoped to share with someone who understood him. But looking at Naya, he realized that she was offering him trust, sincerity, and a vulnerability that deserved care and respect. He wanted to respond, to reassure her, but he also felt the weight of their circumstances, the judgment of others, the memory of his late wife, and the fragile nature of the bond they were building. I hear you, Samuel said finally, his voice steady but gentle. Breaths. I understand more than you might realize. I've been lonely too, in ways that are hard to explain. Brace. And I want to be here for you. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I do know that I care, and I'm willing to try.
A sense of relief and connection washed over Naya.
For the first time, she felt that her longing had found a safe place. Samuel's words were not just comforting. They were a promise. Fragile, but genuine. In that quiet moment, under the gentle sway of the trees and the distant calls of the animals, something shifted between them. Their bond had deepened, not just through work or proximity, but through shared vulnerability and trust. Psst. Yet life, as it often does, did not allow them to remain entirely free from pressure. Rumors in the town began to grow, subtle at first but gaining strength as days passed. Samuel's neighbors whispered about the young Apache woman visiting his ranch, and some questioned whether such a connection was appropriate. Naya's family noticed her frequent absences and the change in her demeanor, sensing that she was developing feelings for someone outside her community. The scrutiny, though never openly confrontational, was a constant presence, a reminder that their growing relationship existed in a delicate balance. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences and tending the animals, Samuel and Naya sat on the porch together watching the sun dip behind the hills. The quiet moment was peaceful, but there was tension in the air, unspoken yet palpable. They're watching, Naya said softly, breaking the silence. People are curious, Britt. Some of them don't understand, and some of them might judge. Samuel nodded, understanding her concern. I know. I've noticed it too. But we can't let that control our lives. We've built something real here, something that matters. We just have to be careful, patient, and honest with each other. That's all we can do. Naya leaned her head on his shoulder for a brief moment, feeling comforted by his presence. She understood the challenges ahead, the delicate balance between tradition, expectations, and personal desire. But in Samuel she had found a sense of stability and understanding that she had longed for. Samuel, in turn, felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had been lonely for years, carrying the weight of loss and responsibility, but Naya's presence had brought him a lightness he had almost forgotten. Together they were learning to navigate the complexities of life and human connection. As the weeks turned into months, their bond continued to grow. They shared small joys, the laughter of a calf playing in the field, the quiet satisfaction of repaired fences, the taste of freshly baked bread. They supported each other through setbacks, celebrated successes, and slowly began to envision a future that included both of them. But the pressures from the outside world remained. Whispers in the town, questions from neighbors, and subtle warnings from members of Naya's community reminded them that their relationship, while natural and sincere, was not free from scrutiny. One afternoon, a particularly harsh wind swept across the plains, carrying dust and debris with it. Samuel and Naya were in the barn, securing equipment and reinforcing fences. The storm outside mirrored the tension they sometimes felt, the unpredictable pressures of the world and the challenges of living openly in a community that did not fully understand them. Yet, inside the barn there was a quiet determination. They worked together side by side, their movements synchronized through familiarity and mutual trust. Each gesture, each word, reinforced the connection they had built, showing them that strength, patience, and understanding could weather even the harshest storms. By the end of Part 4, both Samuel and Naya had faced the reality of public scrutiny, personal doubt, and the complexity of their growing emotions. They had confronted vulnerability, expressed their deepest longings, and recognized the challenges that lay ahead. Yet through it all, their trust in each other had strengthened, proving that genuine connection could endure even when the world outside seemed uncertain or critical. They had discovered that love and companionship are not simply about ease and comfort, but about courage, patience, and the willingness to be seen and understood despite the challenges. Seasons shifted slowly across the plains, painting the land in colors that changed with the weather. Samuel and Naya had endured months of quiet challenges, subtle judgment, and the weight of their own doubts. Yet through all of it, their bond had grown stronger, built on trust, patience, and the quiet understanding that they were no longer alone. The ranch, once a place of routine and solitude, had become a home where warmth, companionship, and hope could exist side by side.
It was early morning when Naya arrived at the ranch, the sky painted with soft hues of dawn.
She rode with ease, the horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Samuel stood near the barn, waiting as he had grown accustomed to doing. When their eyes met, there was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that the days they had spent together had transformed them both. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows across the land, yet the light felt brighter, as if the plains themselves were celebrating their quiet resilience.
"Morning," Samuel said, tipping his hat.
His voice was steady, but there was warmth in it, a tone that had not been present in his life for many years. "Morning," Naya replied, dismounting her horse and tying it to the post. She carried a small basket, but her attention was on Samuel, on the ranch, and on the life they were slowly building together. Their morning routine began as usual, checking the fences, tending the animals, and ensuring that the land remained cared for. But this morning felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense that their partnership had reached a point where both could imagine a future beyond mere survival and companionship. As they worked, they shared quiet conversations, discussing small plans for the ranch and larger ideas about their lives. Samuel spoke about improvements he hoped to make, new tools he wanted to acquire, and ways to ensure the animals' safety during the coming seasons. But Naya listened attentively, offering suggestions that reflected both her practical experience and her knowledge of the land. Each idea was met with respect, each opinion considered, reinforcing the balance that had developed between them. After a few hours, they paused under the shade of an old oak tree, enjoying a brief respite from the sun. Naya pulled out a small cloth and offered Samuel some water. "You've been working hard," she said softly.
You deserve a break. Samuel smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude that went beyond the gesture. "Thank you," he said.
"You've been working just as hard. I couldn't manage this without you." The words hung between them, carrying more meaning than either could fully express. For Samuel, it was an acknowledgement that he no longer needed to bear the weight of his life alone. For Naya, it was recognition that her presence, her strength, and her willingness to trust had created a place for her in Samuel's world. Later that afternoon, a small group of neighbors rode past the ranch. Samuel and Naya paused, aware of their watchful eyes. In the past, such scrutiny had caused tension, doubt, and subtle fear. But now both faced it with a quiet confidence. They knew that their connection was genuine, that their companionship had been tested by both circumstance and public perception. There was no need for them to hide, for their bond had already proven itself strong enough to withstand whispers and judgment. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Samuel and Naya sat on the porch of the ranch house. The air was calm, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the faint aroma of baked bread cooling in the kitchen. They watched the cattle moving slowly across the fields, the landscape bathed in a golden glow. For a long moment neither spoke, simply enjoying the quiet presence of the other. Finally, Naya broke the silence.
"I've been thinking," she said, her voice soft but resolute.
"About my family, our traditions, and everything I've been taught. I realize now that following my heart doesn't mean I'm abandoning who I am. It just means I'm choosing to live fully, honestly, and with someone who understands me." Samuel listened, a deep sense of admiration and respect filling him. "I feel the same," he said. "I've carried memories, responsibilities, and fears for so long, but with you, I see that life can be more than just survival. It can be about connection, understanding, and the quiet joys we share." Naya reached out, placing her hand gently on Samuel's. The gesture was simple, yet it carried all the unspoken emotions between them: trust, warmth, hope, and the courage to embrace a future together. Samuel responded by taking her hand, feeling a sense of reassurance and belonging that he had not experienced in years. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of purpose. Samuel and Naya worked together seamlessly, planning improvements to the ranch, tending to animals, and exploring ways to make life better for both themselves and the surrounding community. Their collaboration was not just practical. It was a reflection of the trust and mutual respect that had become the foundation of their relationship. In the evenings, they often walked along the edge of the property, watching the sunset behind distant hills. Their conversations became more personal, more hopeful, as they shared dreams, plans, and the quiet joys of each day. They laughed together, supported each other during small frustrations, and celebrated even minor successes as a team. The companionship they had longed for was no longer a distant hope. It had become a tangible reality, woven into every aspect of their lives. One evening after a particularly long day of work, Naya spoke quietly as they sat on the porch together. "Samuel, I feel like I finally belong somewhere," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Not just on the land, but with you. I feel safe, understood, and at peace." "Great. And I feel the same," he replied. "I've carried so much for so long, but with you, I feel like I can finally let some of it go." "You've brought warmth, hope, and a sense of purpose back into my life." Their words were not grand declarations, but they carried the weight of truth, honesty, and the quiet power of shared understanding. They did not need grand gestures to prove their connection. It was evident in the way they worked together, spoke to each other, and offered support without expectation. As the seasons continued to change, the ranch became not just a place of work, but a home filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and the subtle rhythms of life shared between two people who had found each other against the odds. Samuel and Naya learned that love and companionship were not always about dramatic moments, but about the steady presence of someone who cares, understands, and is willing to share the journey. The community, too, began to notice the change. While there were still whispers and occasional questions, most people could see the respect, care, and harmony between Samuel and Naya. Slowly, acceptance followed curiosity. Neighbors recognized that their connection was genuine, built on trust and shared experience rather than impulse or superficial attraction. Naya's family, too, began to understand that her choice to spend time with Samuel did not diminish her heritage or her identity. Instead, it reflected her ability to balance tradition with personal growth, showing strength in her own way. One crisp morning, as the first frost of the season touched the plains, Samuel and Naya worked together to repair a small section of the barn roof. The cold air nipped at their fingers, but their movements were synchronized, practiced, and efficient. As they paused to admire their work, Naya looked at Samuel and smiled. "We've come a long way," she said.
"We have," Samuel replied, returning her smile. "And there's still a long way ahead, but—"
"I feel ready for it. With you, I feel ready for anything." Naya's heart swelled with warmth. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that together they could face them. The trust, love, and understanding they had built were strong enough to carry them forward, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. By the end of the day, the ranch was quiet, patient. The animals were settled, the fences secured, and the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted with the soft glow of twilight. Samuel and Naya stood side by side, watching the landscape they had worked so hard to care for, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. In that moment, they both understood something essential. Companionship, trust, and emotional connection were not fleeting. They were cultivated over time, nurtured through shared experiences, and strengthened by honesty and patience. The loneliness that had once defined their lives had been replaced by warmth, hope, and the quiet joy of knowing they were no longer alone. As night fell over the plains, the stars twinkling above like tiny beacons of possibility, Samuel and Naya returned to the house. They shared a simple meal, laughter, and conversation, savoring the comfort of shared presence. When the day finally came to an end, they settled near the fireplace, the warmth of the flames reflecting the warmth in their hearts. For Samuel, the loss he had carried for so long remained, but it was no longer a burden that defined him. For Naya, the longing she had felt for companionship had been fulfilled in a way that respected both her individuality and her heritage. Together they had found a balance between past and future, tradition and choice, solitude and connection, and as they sat together hand in hand watching the firelight dance across the walls of the ranch house, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of challenges, beauty, and possibilities. But with trust, understanding, and the warmth of each other's presence, they were ready to face whatever came next. Their story was one of quiet resilience, emotional honesty, and the transformative power of companionship. It showed that even in the harshest of environments, amidst solitude and expectation, human connection could thrive. And in the heart of the vast plains, Samuel and Naya had found not just warmth, but a home in each other.